It was one of the most frightening moments of my life. I was in court and about to receive a sentence of 5 weeks in jail for driving drunk. That wasn't a position I ever imagined I would be in. Since I was the last person to receive sentencing that day, the judge couldn't understand why there were still 18 people in the courtroom. She wanted to know who they were, why they were there. My attorney explained, "They are here to support Mr. Samson, Your Honor." And to that, she expressed true surprise. I suspect surprise is not an emotion judges experience often. And then she counseled me, "You are very fortunate. Be sure and lean on those people when your time with us is done." 35 days later, I walked out of confinement and I leaned on those people to help rebuild my life. And my experience, what happened and what I learned, is what I'm going to share with you today. Now, here's the key takeaway from my experience. You cannot succeed alone, but you can thrive together. Let's unpack that first idea. You can't succeed alone. Now, there's a good chance you didn't hear the actual words I said in that sentence. There's a reason for that. Our minds tend to filter out unfamiliar information. I said you can't succeed alone, but the way our brains work, you may have heard something like, "Yeah, most people who succeeded had a little bit of help." That's what happens when we hear something different than what we've believed. We try to compare it with what we already think is true. So if I said to you, "There's this guy named Tiger, and he's a so-so golfer," your brain would say, "Wait a minute, hold on, dude. You mean Tiger Woods? Because that guy's a great golfer, maybe the best golfer that ever lived." So when I say you cannot succeed alone, your brain takes in that information. It compares it to existing data, to what it already believes to be true. And your brain, you, were taught from birth that you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, that we live in a land of opportunity. With just a little moxie and hard work, you can think and grow rich. You've been told that you have the same amount of time in a day as a billionaire. I have a theory about those ideas. My theory is that they are, I think the technical term is horseshit. Not because they're completely wrong. In fact, they're partly right. But you've received them as the whole truth. And as Benjamin Franklin said, a half-truth is often a great lie. In our culture, we love the rags to riches story. The self-made woman, self-made man. We tell tales about those folks around our cultural campfires. We make them the heroes of our grand narratives. We celebrate the story of that one individual who succeeded against the odds. But that should raise an important question for us. Exactly why are the odds stacked against success? Now, by contrast, I personally have experienced the truth of what it means to thrive together. That original group of 18 were people from my recovery program, from my parish, from my community. I was able to reboot my life and thrive because of that team and because I was willing to both think and act different. I was able to begin developing a whole new operating system. And a new operating system is critical for the time we live in. Our current system is one of rugged self-sufficiency. It's driven by an entire industry dedicated to telling us how to improve our lives. It's called the self-help industry. And it's big, it's ginormous even. We spent $11 billion last year on books, videos, classes, all designed to tell us how to improve our lives. And that number is going to grow to more than 13 billion next year. Let's face it, that desire to improve our lives is natural. It seems embedded into our DNA to be better than our parents, to be safer, more secure, to enjoy luxuries that previous generations could not. It's an evolutionary desire to improve ourselves. So we spend a lot of money on self-help. But is it helping? Was it worth all those billions? It would be impossible to say yes to that question. To say yes, that all the dollars we're pouring into self-help are in fact helping us in any positive way. Every year we spend more money on self-improvement, Yet every year we become more and more depressed. And that was true even before a global pandemic. Now, I'm not suggesting self-help is making us depressed, but we need to admit it is not helping. Well, you might say that all those ideas are making us wealthier. Nope. We're actually going backward in that regard. In 1980, more than 90% of workers in their 30s and 40s made more than their parents did at that same age. Today that number is less than 50%. Less than half of the people in their 30s and 40s today earn more than their parents did in real dollars. And we all suffer from the effects of that backward movement. There's two economists, Ann Case and Angus Deaton. They've demonstrated an epidemic of what they call deaths of despair among the white working class. People are choosing slow suicide because they no longer believe they are part of the great success story. They believe that they are stuck in rags with no path to riches. We could also look at the work of Jones and Porter from the census. They demonstrated that there's a lack of upward economic mobility among people of color. We could look at research on the continuing gender pay gap or a growing lack of upward mobility by geography, and on and on and on. Here's my point. We're spending billions of dollars a year on self-help, and we are not helping ourselves. We're not getting better, we're actually getting worse. Okay, so right about now, you may be saying, yeah, I got it, Will. Stuff's broken. I understand, I agree. But here's the deal, man. Like, I'm doing fine. I'm succeeding, so why should I care? Well, there's at least 3 reasons why you should care, and the first is just pure survival instincts. We are in the midst of a collapse of global systems. We need each other more than ever before, and we need the resources of each person. The science fiction writer David Brin, he says that it's our job to be good ancestors. And I would add that the future of humanity really depends on us learning to be good ancestors. There's another reason you should care, though. You should care because it's an indicator of your own psychological well-being. In talks like this, you often hear the phrase, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a sick society." But there's ample evidence to show that that statement is more than just glib TED Talkism. Ever since Emil Durkheim published his research on suicide in 1897, we've understood the strong relationship between healthy social structures and personal psychological health. You want more proof? Just ask an addict. Ask someone in recovery and we'll tell you that we're most healthy when we seek the welfare of others. And we're most sick and most vulnerable to our disease when we focus only on our own needs. There's a third reason why you should care about whether we're all succeeding, and that is that humans are meaning-making creatures. We make sense of the world in part by our desire to belong. And as inequality grows, we are degenerating back into an unhealthy tribalism. Learning how to thrive together is a blueprint for a kind of future healthy tribalism. So where do we start? Well, as I've learned in the rooms of recovery, the first step towards solving a problem is admitting you have one. Here's our global cultural problem. We have bought into a lie. Self-help isn't helping. All our attempts to succeed alone have left us depressed, poor, and in a state of great despair. Why? Why is that? Well, it could be that we're asking the wrong questions. In our self-help focused world, we tend to ask questions like, what skills do I need to help myself? And the self-help universe is more than happy to provide you with answers. Practice the 5-second rule. Develop atomic habits. Think and grow rich. And that same universe is more than happy to answer the question, how do I measure my progress? We're told to get things done right or practice the Pomodoro technique. But what if the problem is so much deeper than skills or measurements? What if the problem is the underlying assumption? What if the problem is the operating system itself? What if we are designing the most elegant apps imaginable for the Android, and we cannot figure out for the life of us why those apps won't run on our iPhone. We need a new operating system. Okay, so what would this new operating system look like? Well, we certainly could engineer a one-size-fits-all solution, but that's been the error of the self-help industry. Instead, we should turn to design thinking. Design thinking it's just a way of approaching problems, big or small. It begins by seeing the perspective of the person or the group who's having the problem, and you then imagine possible solutions to that problem, and you prototype those solutions. So what problems should we address? What would help us imagine and prototype a new operating system? Well, the first is this idea that we succeed alone, that any one of us have within ourselves everything we need for our individual success. It's a fantasy, but it's one deeply embedded into our cultural narrative. It's so embedded and so deep, in fact, that we could think of it as what we sometimes call a wicked problem. A wicked problem it's just a cultural dilemma with no clear and easy answers. To prototype a solution to this problem, a group of us have begun asking this design question. What would it look like if we met once a week? We talk about our desires for ourselves and for our families and for the world, and we offer to make whatever resources we have available to each other. We'll see how that prototype works out, but this talk you're hearing, it's one of the outgrowths of that prototype. But let's dig a little deeper, because underneath the belief that we succeed alone is an even more insidious belief. That is the idea that the ultimate end of our human existence is the self-actualization. We hold this belief because we learned about it in high school psychology class. Remember Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs? The top of that triangle was the best version of us. There are so many problems with this idea. One of the problems is that Maslow himself revised his thesis. He later came to believe that there was a much greater mission for humans. That mission was to be actualized into the society, to find our greatest selves in the collective. When we start talking about finding ourselves in the group, one fear usually comes up, and that is the fear of co-dependence. But we are no less troubled when we claim a false kind of independence. So what if we were to ask ourselves this design question? How can we model healthy interdependence? What would it look like if we chose healthy entanglement with others? And further, how could we create a place for people to practice that kind of vulnerability? For those of us that spend time in the rooms of recovery, we see this modeled and prototyped every day. We model that behavior because it's also true that our very survival depends on it. We know we could not thrive without the support of the group. But there's something much bigger happening there. The rooms of recovery give us a chance to practice new beliefs. Beliefs in things like interdependence and vulnerability. And if attitudes and beliefs are skills, then we need a place to practice them. You want to become a better writer? Then write. You want to become a better accountant? Add, or whatever it is that accountants do. You want to be someone that practices interdependence and vulnerability? Find a place to practice those attitudes and beliefs. Unless you think these ideas only apply to recovery, you might check out the TED Talk by Michael Brody Wade entitled "Great Leaders Do What Drug Addicts Do." So we need to prototype how we thrive together, since we can't succeed alone. And we need to prototype ways to practice interdependence and vulnerability. But a third belief badly in need of a redesign is the belief, perhaps even our greatest fear, that there will not be enough, that our needs and our wants will go unmet because of scarcity. A group of us have been prototyping a solution to this problem for almost 17 years. We began with the design question, how can we help eliminate economic isolation? And so through a project called Common Change, we've pooled resources with people we know to provide help for those we care about. Over that time, we have given away hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've seen lives changed, all by asking the simple question, how do we help our neighbors feel less alone economically? So I've posed 3 design questions. 1, since we aren't succeeding alone, how can we thrive together? 2, how can we practice interdependence and vulnerability in our businesses and communities? And 3, how can we move beyond our needs to find a way of living wholly in the world? How can we, as Wendell Berry would say, do unto others downstream as we would have those upstream do unto us? And these design questions, these are the same I'm asking in my personal journey. I'm developing a new operating system for living in the world. I believed I could succeed alone, and that did not end well. I'm learning to thrive with a group of people committed to each other and to our common welfare. I have a place to practice interdependence and vulnerability. And with others, we are demonstrating the belief that there is enough. Through these design prototypes, I myself am learning that another kind of life is possible. Another kind of world is possible. Together, we can keep testing that theory. Won't you join me?